come back and we'll kind of work it out from there. So we're already recording.
So welcome, and thanks for joining us. We're here to kind of have an opportunity to explore elements around negotiating your space and place in graduate school. And some of that relates not only to how to get into the graduate school of your choice, but then also how to negotiate your space once you're in graduate school. And that can really relate to any number of things, from your research to your relationship with professors to really finding your voice and being able to present all aspects of your identity in the graduate school space that you're in. So that was kind of the notion behind this type of workshop, and really excited to have Dr. Gamble here to share some of his experience and thoughts around that topic. So, Dr. Gamble.
All right. Thanks. So today, we didn't have quite the turnout we wanted, but this turned out even better because I feel we're going to probably reach more people and really talk about graduate school in a different way, I think. So I'll share some of my testimony about how I ended up in graduate school, ended up in a master's degree program and a doctoral program, but both of them had to do with a particular route that I wanted to take. So I'll take it back to when I was an undergrad, a junior at a very small college. And I'll give you a little background as well. So I went to community college for my first 2 years because my father wasn't quite sure that he wanted to spend any money on an unknown quantity such as myself. And I graduated high school with an exact 3.0. And that didn't come about until I took some really great general elective courses to make sure that I was going to graduate with halfway decent grades at the end. My freshman, sophomore year, I really didn't know what I was doing in high school. And even towards the end, that still took me a while to figure it out, but I loved psychology. So for those of you watching, you may have some passion that you're interested about, but maybe not quite sure how you get there. And my parents were both math teachers. So social sciences and those other things they really weren't quite as interested in, but they were encouraging me to move along. So I ended up transferring from Palomar Community College in the San Diego area. So I'm very much a California kid. Ended up going to school in Alabama, a small historically black college, Oakwood University in Huntsville, which is the northern part of Alabama. Very, very different. I'll just give you one basic that really just blew my mind for a while. They have no buses. They have only one freeway. And without the buses, I'm a college student trying to get around town, and I'm coming from a place that has cars and everything, and things that are open until late at night. Or don't close at all, like restaurants that end with Birdos. And so I wasn't able to have some of the same cuisine I'm used to as being a California kid. But it caused me to reflect a lot being in this small town. And as I reflected a lot, I wrote quite a bit about different graduate schools I was thinking about, only because some of my professors had told me you should probably go to graduate school with a psychology degree. And I hadn't really even thought that far. I just thought, hey, I'm in college, leave me alone. But I started thinking about what's next, and so I applied to different universities. And I applied while I was doing two things. I was our community service, well, actually three things. Our community service liaison. It was an officer position that I created. And in creating this officer position, I would have my fraternity brothers and I get in a truck or a Ford Explorer, and those were hot cars back then. We drive down the hill, go to a local housing project, and talk to young people about math, particularly 3rd through 6th graders. And most of them, even the 6th graders, didn't know their times tables. This just baffled me how they can be in school and not get that. And that's some of my privilege showing in that I got two parents who are college-educated math teachers. So I figured everybody should. I struggled at math, but I figured everybody should kind of get these basic concepts, and they weren't, which frustrated me. So it focused me on what career could put me in that position to help me with young people and help them understand whatever they need better if their education isn't fulfilling what they needed. So that brought me to school counseling in general. And I applied to two programs right away that were nearby where I grew up. One was San Diego Point Loma Nazarene College, and the other one was in Riverside, La Sierra University. And both of these were Christian universities. I was at a Christian institution. So I figured, well, that would be more seamless. It would work out for me better. But then I started looking at how much they cost. And so my father, he had always said about going to graduate school is that there are many graduate schools. And my sense is there's twice as many graduate schools now because of the explosion for profit universities. But he said the issue is that you've decided that you're going to go, and you have a real clear purpose about what's going to come out of that. So I'd already come in with research questions, some of which I'm still asking almost 20 years later. But in regards to working with young people, particularly young black students in elementary, middle, and high school, and helping them kind of navigate their own learning challenges, and then helping the educators figure out how to better serve them. So there was one other program, my mother, who had just finished her graduate school program. She was in her late 30s going to graduate school at San Diego State, and she handed me some information about a school psychology program. Now, we really hadn't talked about exactly what I wanted to do with my degree, but it talked about working with black students, and they had a grant. And this grant paid for all my education, so my tuition was free. On top of that, they gave me $400 to go to school. Interestingly enough, here at Cal State Long Beach, our school psych program has a grant that students participate in, which pays for most of their tuition and some travel and other things. San Diego State still has the same thing. If you're still thinking about that particular career, I'm always recruiting for school psychology, as you can tell. But I applied to those 3 different programs. I looked at 2 others. One was in Alabama, but they required that I do a teaching credential. The other one was in Loma Linda, California, which is way past in the San Bernardino County area. So on the way to the mountains. And it was a clinical psych program, and it just seemed to cost too much, and I really wasn't as interested in clinical psychology as I was educational or school psychology. So that helped me narrow down to what I was looking at. And then when I heard about the cost compared from San Diego State compared to these other private institutions I've been looking at, it was very easy for me to choose which one I really wanted to go to, but then it came down to the interviews. Interesting thing, and I wasn't aware that there was more than one application for graduate school. So for those of you taking notes, there's usually more than one. There's usually the university application, and then there is the program application. And I completed the university application, and they were very excited about that, and they actually called me. So I'm living in Alabama at the time. I'm working also as a part-time substitute teacher, as well as a full-time PE teacher in the afternoon. I only taught one class at a private school in the afternoon. Then at night, I would work on a truck for a local department store, and I'd unload all the wares that came off that truck, and I worked the night shift from like 6 o'clock at night to almost 6 o'clock in the morning. So off of very little sleep, but during my lunch shift, I wrote to all these different graduate school programs, filled out applications, and then I would go back to the university, type things up. The San Diego State application, though, because I thought I was already done, and school was out. So in Alabama, things kind of shut down. And when school was out, I didn't have any more access. I've already graduated now. I don't have any more access to the university, so I have to go to Kinko's, which is mostly now FedEx, office supply, and I had to go and pay to type, and then fax my application to San Diego State. And they still wanted me. So I interviewed, and they actually paid for my plane flight out to San Diego. And I wasn't quite sure actually how they were going to pay for my tuition, but as all that unfolded, within 2 or 3 days, they let me know that I was accepted to the program, and that they would be paying for my tuition. And then on top of that, they gave me $400 a month just for living and school supplies. So it's a pretty exciting deal, knowing that even from when I was in my junior year, and I had to think about it, even when I was 10 years old, getting sent to the principal's office on a regular basis, I couldn't quite figure it out. Now I'm in a career that allows me to figure that out and help and support other young people. Not everybody has that direct path to doing what they want to do, but I think that does help give you a sense of purpose and really help focus you when you write your statement of purpose because I review those now for graduate school, and I teach here in the school psychology program. So when students apply for the school psych credentials program, I review their applications, and I can tell who really wants to be in school psychology and who just kind of sees it as maybe something that's extra to what they're doing. And sometimes folks may not be clear exactly the difference between school psych or school counseling, but when they have a focus for what's next and kind of what they want to research and how they want to apply whatever graduate degree they earn, that comes across too.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Please.
So as you continued on with your education, so you completed the program at San Diego State.
Right.
And your research interests, can you share a little bit about what those were?
Sure. As I mentioned before, so you have those young people who were at this housing project and I was working with. It was mostly black students. Although it was interesting, in Alabama and most parts of the South, you particularly have a black part of town and a white part of town. This housing project happened to be kind of on the edge. So a lot of the students who went to school, they went to schools with mostly black students, but their teachers were not black, and they were mostly white teachers. And there was this interaction that seemed to be very challenging and kind of slowed things down. So I found out about what's called the fourth grade failure syndrome, mainly highlighted by a researcher who has his own company. His name is Jawanja Kunjufu. And he looked at that, students go from learning to read from first to third grade to reading to learn. And if they don't make that hump in third through fourth grade, a lot of times they may be referred for special education placements. Or they may act out with discipline issues because they're not being challenged. And they haven't learned how to read, or they haven't learned the basics of math, and so everything else that's coming at them is just frustrating. So that's kind of where I stayed for a while. So at my master's program, we did a lot of presentations around the issues that kind of lead to that fourth grade failure syndrome, and then conversations about, this is 1996, the big conversation in education was about Ebonics. And whether or not Oakland or Los Angeles could teach teachers about Ebonics, but the way it came out in the political sphere was that they were teaching students Ebonics, which didn't make any sense. The students were coming with Ebonics, which would be more like a black dialect. And I remember one panel they had on C-SPAN, and they were talking, and it was a Asian administrator who was saying that we have Chinese students who speak Ebonics because of the neighborhoods that they live in within Oakland. And so they were trying to just break down the language structure and dialect to teach that to the teachers so they can better teach standard English. But I got into those kind of conversations mainly when I was in my master's program. Fast forward 7 years later, I was looking more at how do you get districts to change if they're kind of stuck and they're producing, again, the ongoing underachievement of African American students. And so I looked at that as well as the social capital and the people that are connected. Now I'm getting all wonky into sociology stuff, but that same question I'm still kind of asking, but now I'm asking it at a broader level. What kind of connections do we need to make in order to promote that change later on? And
so to be clear, you're saying that the 7 years later is through your PhD. So
you
completed the PhD program.
Actually an EDD program. So an applied educational degree, kind of like an applied medical doctor, an educational doctor, as it were, more specifically applied to what happens in schools and how you make that happen.
And what made you want to pursue that level of education, given that that's what, 2-3% of the population gets a doctorate?
True. I had more questions to ask. It wasn't about the money at some point. Every job I've ever had, this is how I made it through undergrad and graduate school. Every job I ever had up until I became a college professor, I made more money. And then as a college professor, I finally found a way to make more money through consulting and other things. And that becomes more like I run my own business and that kind of thing. But up until that point, it was always, all right, keep finding what's next. But I really still had more questions about how do we solve some of these larger social problems. And people have written about it. How do I do my own research around it? And there was the opportunity to go to the doctoral program that supplied that for me.
And when looking for the doctoral program, and as you mentioned, I know we've had conversations and really looking at the climate of the doctoral program and how, or any graduate degree program, and how is that climate relevant to what my experience is going to be there? Why should I care about the climate? Should I be drawn to the name? Should I be drawn to, what should I be thinking about as I'm exploring this? Because I know that people walk into different settings, and we know there is a lot of research in terms of, certain climates that may be more challenging than others, for especially when we're talking about students with different intersecting identities and trying again to break through in some of those programs where maybe their research topics or ideas or the direction they want to go with their research may not be as favorably looked upon.
I'll even back up because I think climate's important, but I'm going to kind of go from the ending point all the way back to when you first apply. So going to a doctoral program is slightly different than going to a master's program. A master's degree should be able to help you solve the problems that are directly in front of you in the field or in the area or career you want to work in. And so it gives you the tools to kind of go out there and make things happen based on science, right? A doctoral degree is the one step further where you're also able to help inform what science is. Right? I want you to get that piece. You tell people what science is when you have a doctoral degree. Therefore, like a thesis defense and a dissertation defense, it's a battle. It literally is a battle of the minds, but it is a battle of who has the best idea. And so these people are going to try to say, well, this idea, I don't like this, I don't want to push that, I don't want to push that. But at the same time, it can be very rewarding if you're moving towards a broader goal. And I look at it, it is kind of exciting. So when I worked in school psychology in K-12 schools, we've had meetings about students. A lot of people would say they dread having those meetings. I had to put it in my mind that I enjoyed them. And then eventually I did, because we would get to a point where this is what we're going to do to help this child. If you approach, I think, graduate school that way, it's stressful, they're asking me a lot of questions, but at the end, this is what I'm going to do to answer these questions. This is what I'm going to do to help more broadly address and maybe even shift the entire conversation about how we're addressing the population that I really want to serve. And particularly if it's your own population, you're coming from a very specific intersection of those different populations, or you want to be a broader voice for those groups. I think that's important to have folks that will support you there. If you can't find the people who are there, but they're offering you a bunch of money, and that's part of your own priorities. Like, I'm the first in my family to go to college. I'm the first in my family to earn a doctorate degree. My parents were the first in their family to earn masters. So, but they're like, we don't have any more money for you. We spent all that on making sure that you made it to get your bachelor's degree. So money and all those other things were a concern. So then I had to say, all right, let me find an organization. For me, the Association of Black Psychologists provided that organization to help me understand the climate I was getting into. And I had colleagues who I invited to the Association of Black Psychologists meetings who didn't make it through the doctoral program. And then they literally came back to me and said, like, the next month, man, I wish I had come. I didn't know what was going to happen. But I think if you're clear about what your purpose is, you'll find some of those people who you need to support you, and they'll find you. But you have to begin by asking the question as you research the programs that you're looking into. So I mentioned 3 to 5 programs that I was looking at, even for my master's degree. I did the same for my doctoral degree. When you're researching those programs, you want to ask those kind of questions about the type of support that they have, particularly if you're a first-generation college student, if you're first in your family to earn a master's or doctoral degree. Also, career readiness, if that's a big part of what you're looking for, how do they help you? The university I chose, they really focused on the next aspect of the career. They were going to give you a solid degree, but they also wanted to make sure that you got placed well. And so that's one of the reasons why I chose that university, because they were very good at that piece. The other one is, if I have an idea that's completely different than the rest of the faculty, I want to know how supported I was. And I asked that to everybody. So I interviewed them, I think, more than they interviewed me. So I asked them harder questions, but those questions also showed that I had done my research about the university. And I was able to say no to some really good offers that may have cost a little less, or it may have been slightly different, but because they weren't able to answer my particular questions about, can you support the type of research I'm trying to do, and I'm asking about African-American males, African-American students in general, do you have the faculty who can support me as I do that kind of research? And if they didn't have a clear, strong answer to that, I moved on to the next program.
So in looking at decisions of when to apply, especially as you're talking about maybe folks who are interested in doing a master's to a PhD or a master's working for a stretch of time and then going back to school for an EDD, when we're looking at those types of questions and trying to feel like, when do I establish enough, quote-unquote, legitimacy, to be able to feel like I will be taken seriously, either as a professional or as an academic? And what does that look like in terms of,
I wrote about this in my personal statement. And then as I left my master's program, too, I wrote about feeling like someone's going to come and get me. And like, hey, you shouldn't be here in graduate school. You're not quite qualified. But I think there's a balance that you have to find with the purpose of why you're there in graduate school and what you're setting out to accomplish. For me, that purpose always stayed ahead of my own fears or my own worries, or even other people's direct statements that maybe, you got here too early, maybe you should have done this or that, maybe your writing isn't this or that. But I had to balance those out and seek out other people who had followed similar paths to mine. One example I have is my professor, Sam Ortiz. And Dr. Sam Ortiz, he's also graduated from the University of Southern California. He grew up in the same small town I grew up in Oceanside. And Sam Ortiz writes about language, and he's a clinical and school psychologist. He writes about bilingual education and these other things. And so he's going through graduate school not realizing like he's dealing with some of these issues of bilingual education being, English being his second language. And so, and then he's also from Puerto Rico, came out to California, and so had a very different dialect of Spanish and all these things about fitting in. He wrote his way through it. And so, and he would come back to revisit it at different times, but actually made his work stronger. So his example, at least for me, of embracing who he was and then adding that to his work on top of that helped to really keep me focused on the kind of work that I was doing. So whatever challenges I was having or thoughts of feeling like I was an imposter, I turned those into all the more reason why I need to be here. Particularly if there's not more people like me here, that's why the conversation seems lacking. So I'll just add to that conversation. Sometimes I did it, and I was rather fearless. I was the youngest person in my cohort, so they would say, "All right, we got it," because I get really passionate about some things. And other times, it was good for me to sit back and listen to other people who were going through similar things, whether they had only recently come out, they're in graduate school and only recently coming out as gay or lesbian or bisexual. Or if they hadn't really confronted kind of growing up with the immigrant experience and then talking about that, but I had a chance to do that within my writing. And I hope other people have that chance too, to have that conversation, which leads to what I call authentic dialogue. Rather than kind of, and I find within education people talk a lot about this is an alternative idea rather than an authentic idea. And I think trying to remain authentic to who you are is much stronger than trying to create another alternate path. I think any path you take to get to the ultimate goals of where you're trying to go is the path. So rather than delegitimizing yourself or the people that you come from, embrace them.
And that, I think that ties in a lot. I know we've spoken a little bit about your focus is a lot of qualitative research.
Yes, it is.
And it seems like you do embrace that in your own work, and you lift the voices of those individuals out to a level of for other people to gain
Right.
awareness, but also to a level of visibility.
Right.
I think, and so the idea of, I think what we hear a lot in terms of graduate school and the type of research, again, that's legitimate, and these arguments around quantitative versus qualitative, and how quantitative, you need to have data, you need to have large numbers, you need to be able to, think about the broader impact. And I wanted to give some space to talk about, what is it about qualitative research that really draws you?
I think it's answering questions other people haven't, asked before, right? About whether it's usually those people whose voices haven't really been amplified. So I'm talking to Black parents right now, and a lot of literature with Black parents really, and there was a lot going on in the late 70s to even the early 90s, which had conversations about, first it was just, man, these Black families are messed up. They're totally different than the traditional Western family. And then it kind of morphed into, well, okay, so they're different. Now they're upset. They're upset at the school system. They're bothered with the mental health services. So I usually look at education and mental health. And I said, okay, it's going all the way back to this scholar, if you haven't heard of him, W.E.B. Du Bois. He was one of the first sociologists in America. Black, white, whatever, he was one of the first sociologists. And in his book, Souls of Black Folk, he asked this question, which really bothered him. And he got tired of people asking him this question, what does it feel like to be a problem? Whether the question was direct or indirect, he got tired of that question. And he wanted to focus on, no, what's right in the world? And so I think there's people out there like Sean Harper and the late Dr. Asa Hilliard who would ask, what's right with Black people? So that's how I approach my research, and there hasn't been a lot of conversations in that. So it puts me in qualitative. I'm not necessarily bought into everything that qualitative methodologies have to offer. And what we mean by qualitative is I'm not running a bunch of numbers, but I'm listening to a bunch of stories. And then I'm looking for patterns within those stories. It's more like artwork, which I find exciting and compelling. I even want to make sure we had some artwork in the background here. It's more like artwork and putting how these colors fit together and how the patterns fit together. And for those of you that still like the numbers or the structure to it, it might be like, a good structured piece of art, but you're still looking for certain patterns within the stories that people are telling you.
The shades of how deep those go.
Yeah. So I enjoy qualitative work in that way because people are giving me answers that probably no one else is getting. And we're asking questions that no one else has asked before. That's exciting to me. Every interview I've done this past 2 months, I've done about 33 interviews. Every interview I've done, I'm like, wow, it's been exciting. Or the twist and turns. I'm thinking the parent, because of their demographics, they're going to present the information one way, but they come with a whole different wealth of knowledge. And I get to be witness to that and go along for the ride and try to do my best to give a good amplification of their voice.
So in kind of closing a little bit, in looking at students who are considering, maybe they've thought about it, maybe they've had a professor tell them, you should think about this, or maybe it's something that they just want to see, and I've had a couple conversations, they just want to see the letters after their name. Because of the status that they feel, the educational status, and a lot of them are first in their families. I am the first in my family. And it's not the reason why I'm doing it, but looking at what advice or reasons, compelling elements would you impart upon individuals who are thinking about a graduate school program, whether that's a master's, an EDD, a PhD.
I don't discount the letters. I just think we got to look at the weight that holds and what does that mean. You can have a doctoral degree in just about anything, but be completely irrelevant to the people that you serve. Particularly if you work at a university and all you do is write a bunch of papers for other people or maybe a small group of about 10 other professors who read your research. And that research may be one line in a set of policy that somebody's writing for the state or for a local school district or city government. But I think the bigger impact is that if you're able to do both, there's a poem, it's an older poem, but it says, you're able to walk with kings and keep your virtue and count with the common man, but not too much, and kind of strike that balance of being able to share the information you need, but also have it be relevant to everyday people. Mm-hmm. So, and I think there's more, with social media, I think there's more opportunities to do that, but I think a lot of the older folks, and I count myself in that range, may not understand how the media, particularly social media exposure, can help influence the conversations that people have about academic or scientific discourse. Because I think people need more science in their lives, particularly around things, this is just my passion, around mental health, around the science of learning and motivation. A lot of things that we talk about, they come from our own experience, but that's so limited. Mm-hmm. If we have a broader range of understanding, we're able to do that. So, when it comes to, like the academic title, I think that should get you going. And the way I've heard it succinctly is that you have your first year in graduate school, you want to save the world. You're so excited. Your second year, you have a small population you really want to help. But that last year, you just want to save yourself, and you want to get out there so you can do the work that you got into it to begin with. And then you have a whole career to answer more and more questions. And I have some dissertation and thesis students right now, and I really just want them to finish so they can go out there and do the great work that they've been training and that they really desire to do.
In your mind, what's the relationship? Because I think some people maybe look at academia and saying it's so far removed from the work, right? Yeah. From the struggle. Yeah. And if you're really invested in social justice, and if you really want to fight, for the people, that the work is not over here, that this is the ivory tower of academia. Right. How, in your mind, what's the relationship between academia and social justice as it relates to?
Well, I'm not a big fan of the term social justice, but the action social justice. So, and I think there's two people in our history, within my lifetime, who exemplify that. And one person, she's still living and still making relevant commentary. One is Angela Davis. So, Angela Davis, even when she was a university professor at UCLA, the governor of the state at the time, Ronald Reagan, was still frustrated with what she was saying. They even enacted certain parts of the law that if you said that you were a communist, that you could not be a credentialed teacher. Yeah, and they put that part to that's still there in the law. The other person who earned a PhD, and he applied what he had learned and then also kind of reinvested that back, was Huey Newton. Now, he had a very sad end, but his impact is still going on. And Huey P. Newton was one of the founders of the Black Panther Party. So I mentioned both of them as, very extreme examples of, and strong examples of being able to tie your activism to academia and science and move that forward in a way that influences not just policy, but influences the whole society. And there's many other people we can name, but those two come to mind because they're here in California, and they're folks who have influenced me as well.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.